and welcome to the Compost Education Centre. Today we're going to have a lot of fun, and our education coordinator Laura is going to be taking us on a spring garden tour. We're going to see a lot of different types of plants and learn about composting. It's going to be awesome. The Victoria Compost Education Centre is located on Lekwungen lands. Lekwungen is the place to smoke herring. More specifically, Lekwungen lands are home to the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations.
Hi everyone, my name's Alora and I'm the Education Coordinator here at the Compost Education Centre. And today I'm going to be walking you through our site and we're going to do a little bit of a spring tour. I'm going to show you some of our garden beds. We're going to learn a little bit about composting and see a little bit of everything we're up to here on site. So I'm going to start by talking to you about this beautiful garden bed right behind me. We call it our welcome bed. And there's two main things that I want to tell you about this bed. So the first one is a little bit about what is growing in it. So we've got a lot of different kind of plants growing in this bed. And some of them, like our strawberries, act as a ground cover and grow all along the soil and actually protect the soil from the really hot sun in the summer and from all of the nutrients running away when it rains. So the strawberries and some of these lower plants act to protect the soil, and then we've got bigger plants that take up sort of some of this middle space and provide shade to the lower plants below them. And then we've got even bigger plants that act to provide shade to all of the plants underneath it and take advantage of the full sunlight that they can access where they're growing. So we're trying to use up all the space and grow a variety of plants so they can work together to occupy different areas of the garden bed and create a full garden with a lot of variety. So the other thing I want to tell you about this garden bed is how all these lovely plants are being fed. So if you can see behind me, there's a little green cone, and it's actually called the green cone digester. So the green cone that we have in this bed is actually feeding all of these plants and making them really healthy and able to grow really big and strong. So inside of this green cone, we put all sorts of food, and the green cone is dug into the ground. So underneath the cone, there is a basket that you can't see because it's dug deep into the soil. And we put all sorts of food into the green cone: fruits, veggies, bread, rice, yogurt, almost anything can go in there. And that food gradually decomposes with the heat of the sun, and it leaks out in a liquid into the soil around it. And then all these plants growing here are able to access the nutrients from that food, suck it up, and use it to grow really, really well. So that's why our gardens look so healthy, is because our green cone is helping feed them. All right, so we're here in a second garden bed, and there's some really cool plants that I want to talk to you about that are growing here. But first, I'm going to tell you about this black bin that we've got here, and it's called our earth machine. So our earth machine is a composting bin, and it's a little bit different than the green bin we talked about earlier because we put a little bit different things in it, and it actually makes a beautiful compost for us. So before we talk about how this bin works, I'm going to show you a poster that I have over here that demonstrates the compost cycle. So at the top, we've got two categories of ingredients that go into all of our composts. We have the green family, and the green family is all of our fruits and veggie scraps, eggshells, and anything that is wet and squishy. And then the second family, and it's really important not to forget this family, is the browns family. So the browns family is things that are dry and crackly, like leaves, newspaper, straw, or anything like that. So those two families work together to create a compost. So we take our food scraps and we take our browns families, we can throw them into our kitchen catcher, and that's when they go into a bin like this. So in a bin like our earth machine here, we like to layer greens family, browns family, greens family, browns family, and we want to make sure that there's enough moisture in it. So sometimes we have to add a little bit of water to make sure that it stays damp, and we want to make sure that there's enough air. So we go in here and we aerate the compost by digging little holes and making sure that there's enough air going through the compost. once all of our ingredients are all mixed in and the compost has had a long time to stew and sit, there's a little door way at the bottom of our compost, and we can pop it up and beautiful finished rich compost comes right out the bottom. And this one's a little bit different than our green cone because it makes this compost that we can then take out and put anywhere we want. The green cone feeds right where it's dug into the ground, but the earth machine gives us the freedom to move that compost and put it wherever we would like to have it. So I'm standing here in our rain garden and our native plant garden on site, and I'll talk to you first about what makes this a rain garden. So on top of me, we have our roof of our office, and there's a little drain that pours out into the garden, and there's something hanging from the drain called the rain chain. So the rain chain is really cool because what it does is as the water pours off the roof, it falls through the rain chain. And then all these pieces of the rain chain are used to splash and spray the water out to a bigger area in the garden and make sure as much of the garden gets rain as possible. So if it wasn't for the rain chain, all the water would fall out of the drain and it would pound down into the same area of the soil. And that would hurt the soil and it could erode the soil, and over time, that area would just get too much pounding and it wouldn't be healthy. But with the rain chain, it allows us to spread this water out to a larger area, and the garden is healthier and happier with the rain that it's getting. And something else really cool about the rain garden is how it keeps rain and traps the water in it to feed the plants for a longer amount of time. So you can't see it, but underneath all these beautiful native plants and underneath the soil are different levels of filtration that help to hold the water that falls into the garden here for longer. So underneath the soil, there's a layer of sand, and then a layer of really small gravel, and then a layer of bigger gravel. So what those layers do is they allow the water to seep through the soil, seep into the sand slowly into the gravel, and be retained and held by the garden for longer. So that way all these plants have access to that water for a longer amount of time, and they can suck it up and use it to feed themselves even after it hasn't rained in a little while. And compared to when rain just falls on the cement and slides away, that rain isn't retained at all. So the rain garden is a really cool way that we keep the rain here, and it actually cleans the water too before it flows out of the basin and returns. Okay, so I want to tell you about a couple of the plants growing here in our native plant garden, and I also want to tell you a little bit about what a native plant is. So a native plant is a plant that's grown here for a very long time, and a plant that has a deep relationship and a long relationship with the lands they're growing on and the people of these lands. So here on the Lekwungen territory, these plants around me have grown here for a very long time, and they're plants that are really well adapted to the weather and the climate and the soil that we have here on these lands. So some of the plants around me you might recognize, you might have seen before. Growing around me right now, I have some Oregon grape, some huckleberry, and there's a couple other berries I want to tell you about as well. So behind me in the light, we have salmonberry, which you might have tried before. It grows little berries that look like raspberries, but can sometimes be yellow or a lighter pink than a raspberry, but they're really tasty. We don't actually get berries on our plant here because it grows too much in the shade and doesn't get enough sun to create berries. And the one plant that actually does create berries that we have here in this rain garden is our Saskatoon tree. So behind me is the Saskatoon tree. It's really tall and it gets a little bit more light because it goes up a lot higher. And the Saskatoon berries that it makes are actually really small. So we don't eat the Saskatoon berries, and we actually leave them for the birds that come by to enjoy, in hopes that when those birds eat the berries and fly around the city, they'll poop out the seeds where they go, and then other Saskatoon berry trees will have the chance to grow and create more berries. And the reason that these berries are actually really small that grow on the Saskatoon tree is because of climate change and the changes in the weather and the seasons. The tree isn't able to produce as big of fruit anymore. Okay, so I'm standing here in front of our aquaponics system. So aquaponics is a really big word, but I'm going to explain to you what's going on here because it's actually pretty sweet and it's not very complicated. So in this black basin in the bottom where you can see and probably hear the water running, we have some big fish living in there, swimming around, doing their thing. And we feed those fish, and as those fish go about their lives, they poop out the food into the black basin. And then we have this white tube that you can see running into the basin. And that white tube actually cleans out the bottom by pumping up the fish poo, pulling it out of the water, and then distributing that water through the white tube on the top into this top area where you can see those lettuce growing. So those red lettuces and other plants growing at the top are actually not planted in soil like other plants and in our other garden beds. They're growing just from the nutrients of the fish poo that's coming up from the fish tank. So it's really cool because the nutrients from the fish are feeding the lettuce enough to give them the nutrients to grow, and that cycle continues without much input from us besides feeding the fish. I'm standing here in our food forest garden bed, and if you take a look at the plants around me, these plants are grown to mimic how a natural forest ecosystem grows. And just like in the front, we've got low-lying plants taking advantage of the soil space and taller plants taking advantage of the full sunlight, all working together here. So a really cool thing about these plants is that they're all perennials. So with our annual veggie gardens, we plant seeds every single year, and then when the season's over, those plants don't come back and we need to plant seeds again the next year. But in our perennial garden, these plants will live year long and produce fruits and berries and food for us year after year after year without us having to plant anything new or do very much to help these plants along. So our perennial garden is a great source of food and a great source of beauty for us here at the Compost Education Centre. And one plant that I want to talk to you about a little bit more is right in front of me. Oh, and there's a little bee landing on it right now. So this plant is comfrey, and you can see it has beautiful purpley pink flowers, and it's a great pollinator plant. So what that means is that the bees love this plant. They're really attracted to it, and they come, they land on the flowers, and they pollinate them. And that's really important because it draws bees in, it makes sure bees are around our veggie garden and pollinating those flowers so that those flowers can develop into fruits and veggies for us to eat. So bees are a really important part of our garden, and plants like comfrey are really great for attracting bees. Comfrey's other really important use is that it's a dynamic accumulator. So what that means is that it has really, really deep roots. And those roots go deep into the soil and are able to pull up nutrients to use that other plants around it might not be able to access. And then when comfrey pulls up those nutrients and uses it to grow leaves and flowers, what we can actually do is chop down bits of comfrey and put it on the ground. Just like here in front of me, there's some old comfrey lying on the soil. And when these leaves decompose into the soil, the nutrients that they've accumulated from way down deep become available to the other plants around it. So comfrey is a great addition to our food forest here. I'm standing right now in our veggie garden beds at the center, and if you look around me, we're currently growing lots of different fruits and veggies. We've got peas and beans, lettuces, potatoes, kale, and all sorts of brassica vegetables. And what's really cool about our veggie gardens and living where we do is that we can grow food all year round. So we're growing lots of different things right now, but during the winter we grew broccoli, cauliflower, kales, and all sorts of things that can be grown throughout the winter season. Now that we've got our summer crops in, one thing that I wanted to share is the mulch that we've got covering them. So you can see, looking at the garden beds, that almost none of the soil is bare. So all the soil is covered in straw, and the plants have been tucked in with this straw. The straw helps to keep the soil cool and damp when it's hot, to keep it out of the sun, and to keep it hot when it gets cold. So it acts as an insulation for the plants and protects the soil, just like the strawberries that I showed you out front do, so that the soil doesn't get sunburnt or eroded. So we're coming to an end to our site tour now, and if you'd like to come visit the CEC, you're welcome to do so and come and explore any of the garden beds I showed you today, or come hang out and have a snack or ask us any questions you have about composting or gardening. And we're at 1216 North Park, so please come on by if you're able, and we would love to meet you. Thanks for joining us today.